right, well, Dusty here at Redeemer Lubbock. I've been going it'll be 14 years in January. I actually think this is a conversation that it shouldn't just be limited to lead pastors because I think, because we're talking about like sending your best, that I think our college staff, everything I'm saying here, they'd be like, oh, yeah. You know what I mean? I mean, like whether it's students, staff, leaders, you name it, I could think of several of almost every ministry area we have here at Redeemer that if sending is like really embedded deep in your DNA, that there's just there's just cascading implications of that in every layer of your church, and you're going to enjoy the benefit of that, and you're going to feel the pain of it. And that's actually what I wanted to frame a lot of my time for, and I hope that this will be interactive. That's kind of my hope, that there's just pain. There's a lot of joy in sending too. I think we can see that. Like there's a lot of, like even seeing that video and hearing Keith talk earlier today, I was like, let's go. You know what I mean? Like, yes, that's why we're in this. I believe that everybody that's here today actually really wants to reach people. You know, I think that's why you're here. You really do. You care about college kids. You care about them being reached and even something really strategic being done with all that. Like I believe you, I really do. And so that's really inspirational. But then like there's this underbelly to all this and I've got, when I started thinking about this session, I actually put 6 things that have been painful about sending. And you're like, no, man, like inspire me. Well, I would just say like Keith's thing was the inspirational part. And there's a real commitment and people and money and everything else you can imagine that whenever you're like, you know what, this is what we're actually going to be about. And church planting is a component of that. But it's actually, I would make the case that if you have a sending culture, there are implications way beyond that we're going to have a church planter every few years that's going to leave or something like that. I mean, I would actually make a case as an entire framework and perspective that even on how you're going to view some of your staff members, church members, you name it. So to be clear also, even though I think that this is one thing that in God's sovereign plan he does, I'm not actually including as a part of this talk unintentional sending. That's where, people get mad at you and leave your church, or you have a staffing train wreck and, somebody gets canned or leaves in a kind of in a huff and they end up, going and serving Jesus elsewhere. I think God uses that in ways that are incredible, but I'm actually not talking about that either. So this is like intentional sending, and then I've got 6 pain points that I have discovered. Now I'll be curious what you guys have experienced on each of these, and there's probably been some pain points you've observed that I'm not covering. So again, there's probably other ways you could talk about this, but I figured this might be kind of a fun way to do it. And after each one of these, I'm going to see if any of you have experienced that before, and maybe even what was painful about it. So does that sound good? Let me a decent way to attack, the sending our best. So the first sending pain, I'm going to call it is, and this one even rhymes, but don't get your hopes up. This is just totally incidental, is talent drain pain. See how that works? Talent drain pain. And this is where I think I felt this more as an early startup so when you're getting started with a church plant, like anything you fought for, right? Like if there's a leader that's been developed, you've probably developed them. Now, by God's grace, there might have been a handful of people that just kind of were there, that joined, that were really highly entrepreneurial, really developed leaders that had been developed by the Lord in other churches, which is awesome when that happens. So when you started, you might have had a couple of those, and then any of the other ones you had, like you trained them, like you showed them, you put a lot of time into them. And usually what ends up happening, at least our story, because you heard some of our start, and we had a big start because I'd been doing college ministry before that in our context here in Lubbock too. Maybe he's predisposed to that. But we had more people than we had like leaders and infrastructure, and that sounds awesome. Like I'm like kind of a humble brag or something, but it really wasn't awesome at all because, we were just woefully behind on developed leaders. And I felt like we spent that first 2 to 3 years just barely kind of catching up with that, trying to make sure that people, had, healthy gospel community leaders and those leaders were trained, but even people taking another step from there, people that had multiplied healthy gospel communities that were now overseeing, other leaders and walking with them, and really in functionally, pastoral function, that, and even aspiration to eldership at Redeemer, and also the church planning component and all that, right? But we're way, way, way behind. So, you make some ground on that, and then over time you've seen you've reached people, and people have grown, starting to have a few more group leaders, having a few more maybe even break into like eldership conversation if they're really well developed when they started. And that was the case for us maybe year 2 or 3. So here's who my like really able leaders were in this decent sized church 3 years in, is I had a guy named Drew Remke that was, nobody came in as an elder, but he would be installed as one of our first 3 elders. I was one, and then he was another. And then there's a guy named Josh Reeves, who was a guy that was very mature, godly. It seemed like all he did was lead healthy gospel communities that would multiply over and over and over again. Groups would multiply, and then he would like train and develop their leader, and that group would be healthy, and it would multiply. And then he would have another one, and then reach new people, and it would multiply. And it was truly incredible. I mean, it really was what was happening. And so I had this 3-person elder team, and it felt really good because, we'd have these membership classes, and I don't know if any of you, do membership classes and those kind of things. How many of you guys do that? Have some kind of membership, deal? And we'd have this whole section where we'd, get up there and talk about our ecclesiology, and we'd talk about, no, we are plural elder governed. Yes, miss, in the back. So who are the other elders? Well, we don't have any yet, but one of these days we're going to, and it's going to be incredible, And then I'd kind of explain, oh, hang on, we do have executive deacons though now, and it kind of at least gives us some plurality, and we have these other kind of people that help to provide, but I bluntly, and this will be a theme that'll come up some today, some of my own insecurities, that it just didn't feel like we were legit yet. And I remember how much it felt really good, even on a personal level, to talk about, well, me and the elders, we decided to go ahead and upgrade our toilet paper situation here, or whatever. It didn't matter what you're talking about, that me and the elders, And so I had elders. And then there was this other really great young leader, a guy named Jordan Elder, that was just out of college, that had helped us start the church. And he had started off doing tear down and set up. And he led a college small group, did tear down and set up, and then became our youth guy, volunteer, and built a youth ministry out of thin air. And then now was doing our college ministry, and was on staff, I think part-time at that time. And so like those are my top 3 leaders I had. And then within just a couple months of each other, Drew sits me down and says, hey man, you know that Jordan and I really want to get back to the Middle East. And I said, yeah, man. He said, well, like next year, that's going to happen. And just a little bit after that, Josh said, hey man, Jordan and I are going to be going to plant. Jordan is that leader number 3 that was leading our college ministry. We really feel like God's leading us to plant in Round Rock. And I'd been talking with them about all this. I've been talking with both of them, but I just didn't know timeline. And it became real obvious that within 6 months, leaders 1 through 3 were about to walk right out that door. That was super painful. And like I normally have quite a bit of faith with the leaders walking out, but I mean, to describe like the Redeemer depth chart of 1, 2, 3, it was like a gap like this. And I mean, some people were growing and doing great, but I mean, we were, the gap, both in the organization, but even, pastorally, you name it, was tremendous. And I remember coming to Jordan, because those guys were gone. And I remember coming to Jordan and being like, dude, can I talk you into staying at least for a year? Let Josh go get set up. But I mean, I think they really felt like that was where God was leading them. Now, I will say one last thing about this, on this talent drain pain, that in retrospect, one thing I would have done differently about that is there was a certain amount of naivety to what I did on all that. Is I was like, well, okay, well, God's leading them to do it, and I agree with what they're doing, and I want to be open-handed. I don't want to be telling people no and all this. Really, Redeemer would have really benefited if I would have sat them down in a room and said, all right, I don't care who's staying for a year, but I can't have my top 3 guys walk out of this church within 6 months of each other. So I don't care who. You guys can paper, rock, scissors that or talk about who can delay, but I need at least a year separation between the two of you, just for the benefit of the church. Like just a little bit more time to develop a few more people that can carry that load. So that's the first kind of pain that I experienced with having a sending culture of, hey, actually you heard about our 2020 vision. Well, there's your first international missionary. He went to the Arabian Peninsula, and then we've got our first ever domestic church plant in Round Rock. That's a real win. Like that's Keith's stuff. You make a video about that kind of stuff. It's incredible. This is all for Jesus. And then I was running this pretty good sized church all by myself again, is what that felt like to me. Does anybody have a talent drain pain story where you were going and like a really gifted young man or woman that was a part of it that's like, hey, this has been great. I'm going to the mission field, or but I'm talking about intentional sending. Anybody have a story like that and how you experienced it?
We had a guy who we had trained at our church, part of our training program. He was a young, like late 20s staff member we intentionally brought on staff with the intention to send him out in a few years. And then several things happened. Part of it was financial.
Yeah.
We ended up having to send him out sooner, which God blessed it on his end with a better situation.
Yeah.
He blessed it on us. But to see, like, at that point, we had a huge gap in our staff age. So he
was like legitimate, like almost legitimized to you guys in a way.
Yeah, just kind of helping us reach the next generation.
Yeah.
All this energy, and he was a leader among his group, and had a lot of great plans for him. And then we were going to send him. We had to send him, about a year sooner than we were planning to, and that was painful because then we went back.
And you didn't have anybody that could be like that effective with that age group anymore. Yeah. That seems that feels pretty real to me. Anybody else have one like that, or just your own story? That talent drain.
We've got one that is down here at y'all's launch program that's like.
Sorry about that. Hey, we're a net exporter. I want to be really clear. We're a net exporter, but we're all grateful. Thank you. I mean, crap. I gave Alan one of my elders, man. So I'll get to that one in a second. Yeah.
But a kid that we trained up did an internship with us and then started college ministry for us, and the gap between him and our current leaders is pretty wide. I guess his skill set really is completely different, and so it's strange trying to navigate that for this year, but super excited about, like you're saying, where he's going and the role that we as a church have in it.
And he wants to go back and do that with you guys, right?
Yeah, like we'd love to see him take what y'all are doing
and bring it back.
Team-wise and bring it back, but
who knows, right?
knowing him, the Lord's going to call him straight overseas and do something amazing, for the Lord.
And that's one I can really relate with a lot. Is you've got, especially in these early stage, it can be an early stage church plant like you are, and like I was, or it can be a more established church that's really trying to like beef up a ministry area. And you've got this really unique person that can really, in some ways, you kind of built the ministry around that unique gift set. And let's go ahead and develop that because we got him or her. And then that person leaves, and you realize you don't have anyone capable of doing it like they could at that quality. Okay, so I think we could feel that one, right? And I think that talent drain is really tough, and I think it's one reason why I heard this analogy just as an aside on church planning. That, and I don't know if Keith would agree with this. I'd be curious if he was in here. I'd love to just hear him kind of banter or agree or whatever. But one time, a guy named Josh Curry, who's a church planner in Oklahoma City, I heard him make this analogy with church planning, and he compared it to like a mom that's given birth to kids, and said that that sometimes that you have this church planning situation, the mother giving birth, and able to kind of recover and have another one in another couple of years, and can do that healthily. And so there's some churches that have the infrastructure, leaders, money, all that, could plant a church a year and sustain it. That's our goal. I actually don't think we're even there yet. Realistically, it feels to me, Brandon, like it's an every other year thing. Probably couldn't do more than one a year with our current setup and needing to kind of enculturate them in our college ministry and give them a lot of visibility and all that. But he said, there's some that need a spa day. That's sometimes a mom doesn't need to go crank out another baby next year, but she might need a spa day and take a break and raise the kids she's got and kind of heal. And the reason I think that's an interesting analogy is that this talent drain thing, not only the money, but what ends up happening a lot of times when you plant, and it depends on the church plant, like if it's more local, then there's a good chance that, like Jordan Elder, the guy I mentioned earlier, that he and Josh have planted a lot of churches in Central Texas, and they plant sometimes like near them. And it seems like your 20 most entrepreneurial leaders in your whole church go with that church plant. Like that's what ends up happening. And I'm talking about the non-staff people. That's another element of talent drain. And so you've got this incredible staff member that was probably leading a good chunk of your church, that was like a wingman to you at an elder, pastor, staff level. And then you've got these like maybe 4 or 5 families that were among some of your very best and the ones that are the most likely to take a risk and really serve and those kind of things. And sometimes that talent drain can, like it leaves such a hole. And looking back at it, I remember being frustrated that Redeemer wasn't immediately able to bounce back and start planting another church. But the reality is we needed a spa day. I mean, in other words, we needed to like rebuild our leaders at ground up. I mean, like the whole thing had been depleted with, because there was another like 4 or 5 families that moved to Round Rock to help plant that from our church. That all that had just regular jobs, but were serving Redeemer. Okay, so I'm going to move on because we've hit that one pretty good. Second kind of pain. So the first one is talent drain pain. The second one, no rhyme, is open-handedness pain. And let me explain what I mean by that. Is a philosophy that I chose to take that was different than any church I'd ever been a part of, was to be really open-handed with any leader that was mine. And if I was going to put mine out there, I'd put it in kind of air quotes, that they're mine. That knowing that convictionally, I actually didn't think any leader in the entire church was mine, convictionally. That every single thing, every resource we have, be it a dollar bill or a human being, has never been owned by me. That these are resources to cultivate, to deploy for God's kingdom, and not all of those should or could or should stay exclusively here. And so here's the thing, and this is why I was saying earlier that ascending culture is not just that you've got a church planter every 3 years, that you're going to send out or something, but I think it's an entire mentality that says, you know what, we are going to reach and disciple and develop and deploy over and over and over again, all right? And what that means is that sometimes you're going to have great leaders that are not ready to plant churches, don't want to plant churches, can't plant churches, anything like that, but they're going to be really great, and another church is going to say, wow, we have a real need, we don't have anyone here, it sure would be great if so-and-so that is on your staff could come do that for us. And we've had that a lot, and I think of some names here that we had 2 successive college directors. Rashard Barnes, I mentioned him yesterday. He was the first one that was telling me about SALT. He had mentored a guy named Mitchell. The Stone hired Mitchell, and they're great talent scouts at the Stone, I'll tell you that. They're very good at that. And then Spencer Stringer was one of our elders, executive pastors here, and he went to, it's an extension of what we're doing, is moving to Chiang Mai, Thailand to be part of our hub team, but is working with what we're doing on sending. But he was, carried a lot of organizational weight internally here. I think of Jeff Oldham, who's a member here at Redeemer, and a really incredible member that honestly I've been kicking myself, not really, but a little bit, because I connected him. I've got a really good friend at Melanie Park Church that's right over here across from Indiana, who's their senior pastor. He's a really godly guy, and he's been needing a wingman forever. I mean, like a guy that really can just be an associate pastor and carry organizational weight, meet with people, and I connected Jeff with him, and they hired him, and it kind of surprised me because I'm kicking myself because I can think of like 3 jobs that we have posted that I'm grateful for all the people we hired, but Jeff would have been awesome at all 3 of them. He could have done the small group job. He could have been the care director. I mean, you could have considered him on probably almost any other job. Maybe the residency, Brandon. I don't know. I mean, there's like all these different things that he could have done. But then there's this open-handedness thing, though, to say, okay, but Jeff wasn't mine, and neither was Rashard, neither was Mitchell. And there's a certain amount of pain for that. And if you're giving opportunities for leaders, then you have to expect that there are going to be some times where other churches or other opportunities that they're going to be really attractive to them, mission agencies, different things that are going to happen. Well, even, Justin, you're mentioning your guy that came here that, well, I mean, he's going to be probably a really attractive candidate to be a missionary. Or the launch people may say, ooh, that's great, but you know where you ought to go? There's another place that you ought to go to help train. There's a place that'll have more college students than St. Angelo. I'm not saying they would, but a guy like that's got some talent and a heart, that there's going to be a lot of opportunities. And so the thing I want to point out here is that your insecurities are going to be really put to the test here, because I'll tell you what I've felt, just being all cards out on the table, is over the years when people take other jobs for other churches, move for other cities, for other opportunities, church members, staff members, elders, you name it, is I have this little thought in the back of my head that says, but don't you want to work with me? You know what I mean? And it's really hard. It's really hard to be open-handed. And it feels like, if you're not really applying the gospel to your own heart and really remembering what you're in it for, it almost feels like sometimes, does anybody here, and I'll bring this up later, does anybody here actually want to work with me, alongside Redeemer, the whole bit? And so you'll those things will be there. Well, my philosophy has been, even with all the insecurities be what they are, I've just chosen to say, you know what, I'm just going to address those head on. And when I have that little voice that comes up that wonders, wait, does nobody want to work with me? And what's wrong with Lubbock? And what's wrong? You don't need to fill in the blank on that. What's wrong with Redeemer? I just choose to address that head on, even admit that to friends around me, and just apply the gospel of grace to my own heart, remember who I am in Christ, all that, just walk through all that. And then I would much rather, and I tell people this a lot, I would much rather them process their career with me than feel like they've got to backdoor me and might keep that hidden from me, that they're talking to another church and afraid that I'm going to kind of cut them loose if they're talking. And I've known churches like that, where like you should not talk to your senior guy or your supervisor about anybody been at churches like that you're a dead man walking. If you say, hey, I just want to let you know there's a church in such and such that's talking to me about the job. I mean, there's a lot of places where like, okay, great, why don't you go give me your keys? You're basically out of here. And I would much rather them even take a risk of including me on a church that's talking with them. And all of the people that have left, I've actually been really involved in all that, and I've done references for them, and I even feel like I'm able to give a really clear picture. And so instead of them having to work around me and not use me as a reference because it would, kind of out them, that I'm actually able to give really good information and a really clear picture to the people that are interviewing them, and so that it can actually be a good fit, because I care about these people, and if they're going to make a move, it needs to be a good move, and where they're a good fit for the role, right? So anybody experience the pain of being open-handed with staff members, elders, church members, and this is a little bit different than the talent drain one, but even intentionally being open-handed, even on non-church planning situations, that's the role specific focus here, and even like felt some of those insecurities pressed and wondering why nobody wanted to work with you. Anybody feel that open-handedness pain at that? You guys have any stories along those lines of, yeah, I'll tell you one. I remember I had this guy and then they left, and that was a tough one. I wanted to kind of pull them back and tell them to stay with me, but I needed just to trust the Lord with that.
We just had it two months ago. In fact, actually, it's connected to the talent one. So the first guy went and planted the church, and then another family, and these are like super close friends to us. He finished seminary, and God was calling him to go join them with the team. So on a personal level, that having that open hand, losing, my wife lost her best friend, my kids lost their best friends, but
that's hard.
For the kingdom's sake, the kingdom's sake, he's absolutely the right guy that the planter needs to be on his staff, to be a part of the team, to do the job. So it's all for the mission, for the kingdom, for the glory, but that pain of just like, I don't want you to go, and I'm like,
when you see these needs in your church and how much they could help, in whatever capacity they were. Yeah, you had one.
Yeah, we had a college student that kind of came through our ministry, but she was like, just a super culture setter, connected with anybody, everybody was super fun. She also lived with us for 2 years, and she had graduated, and it was kind of just time for her to leave. And so we sent her to San Marcos with the well, with Chris Moore, whatnot. So she's there, but it was just like she was family to us.
Yeah.
And just it was just like I think we're still in that that grieving process of just kind of going. You weren't just like a casual college student, you know, like you weren't just like someone that kind of attended. You lived in our home, was a part of our family, ate dinner with us every night.
A family member, really.
Yeah, she was a family member.
Yeah.
And so to our boys too, you know, but it's been really sweet just also see what she's taken from what we've done and applied there.
And that's the thing that's hard, is that there are these incredible things that are actually like investments that you've made in them. You don't necessarily get to see them. Now, I had the benefit of that. I mentioned Jeff Oldham. So the other day, I've got about 4 pastors that are more or less in this neighborhood that every 6 weeks or so we get together and pray. And we're praying at Todd's place. And I saw Jeff over there and hugged him. But whenever we were praying together, like Todd was sharing about things that Jeff is doing in their church and how much like space that he struggles with anxiety too, and how much space that Jeff had provided him emotionally and pastorally. And he feels like he's got more time to prepare for sermons and other things that are needed in the church. And like it actually like choked me up, because he is so good at that, and it made me really happy that God's using him like that for my friend, you know. But sometimes we don't get to see that, because usually they move off to some other place, right? Yeah, that one I feel that one a lot. Okay, so that's open-handedness. Thank you guys for sharing those. Talent drain, and there are a lot of relationship between the talent drain and open-handedness, because bluntly, you know, the open-handed stuff is you're usually being open-handed with really talented people, but the talent one's even really focusing around people that are leaving, especially a lot of times for church planning itself, that it just drains talent necessarily. Our third pain point in intentional sending is they would have really helped here pain, is what I'm going to call that. And I'm really focusing this one around church planning residents specifically for me, like somebody that you've already earmarked for, like, this guy's going to go plant, period, you know. And so I've got my last 2 residents that we've had. This includes Justin, that you guys have seen here, and then another one is a guy named Cody McMurray that's planting in Wichita Falls now. And these are both like super gifted, godly, awesome dudes, like incredible. I mean, truly like great men. Love both of their wives. I mean, they're awesome families, incredibly. And for whatever reason, I would say over the last 3 to 4 years, Redeemer has gone through more staffing transition and shenanigans than any other. I mean, way more in the last 4 years than we did in our first 10, and I can't explain why. And I can't tell you how many times that I've thought, whenever Cody was here, when we were going through some of those transitions, that, for instance, that was the time when Mitchell left. And then this in our college ministry specifically, Mitchell left, and then we're trying to figure out who to put in that role. And we're like, man, there's Cody. He would have really helped here. I mean, he could really, why don't we just kind of pause the church planning thing and let Cody, you know, and plus it'd be good. He can preach and, you know, develop and lead more. And we had to really discipline ourselves with Cody to say, no, we've got to pretend, organizationally speaking, that Cody McMurray does not exist on this planet. I mean, we need to develop him, and sure, get reps, do all that, but we need to pretend that he is not an option at all right? So, like, that's hard, because if you have a really high caliber church planner and resident, whether it's somebody that you've developed up through the years or someone you've recruited, they could have really helped here, and especially if you're in a period of transition. And another one, like, so Justin, more recently, we went through a massive transition that was really difficult with Kent, that was our college director, and then Brandon came in on an interim basis and then ended up being hired permanently. And man, I'd be lying if I didn't at least even say out loud, Justin, I mean, goodness. I mean, that was a dude that led a college ministry of several hundred in Waco. He's a very good communicator. He'd already been preaching and leading already in the college ministry, and people already liked him. Everybody likes Rebecca, and man, he could buy us a couple of years. He could, provide a little bit of stability. People already know him. He's gifted. He knows how to do this. He'd be better than you could hire in the open market. I mean, it crossed my mind, but then to have to almost kind of gulp and say, well, here's the thing though, he didn't actually come here. He was our college director in Waco. Like, that was the job he was doing there. He came here to be developed as a church planner. And yes, he's going to help with the college ministry. It's also going to help him get there. But the reality is that these a church planter is going to be eminently gifted probably in ways that would help your church. And to not kind of hold on to them and delay, and it'd be so tempting. I mean, think about it. Think about my track record of people independent that have been at Redeemer. I wanted to keep Josh Reeves longer. I wanted to keep Jordan Elder longer. I wanted to keep, I will want to keep Justin longer. I wanted to keep Cody McMurray longer. Like all these really gifted people. And so that's a whole other kind of pain specifically related to a church planter in residence that you've got, because they would have really helped here. Anybody got one of those, of a person that you have raised up to go plant that you really wanted, or maybe you were that in resident planter and your sending church was like, we could kind of slow this up a little bit, and if you want to preach a few more times and head up our youth ministry for a year or whatever. Anybody have one of those stories?
Yeah, I was that guy that left, and I felt the pain on the back end because whatever ministry I was involved in kind of fell apart afterwards, and you kind of have guilt, and I'm like, oh, was I really pursuing the Lord and going and doing this thing? If I'd stayed, it could have been so great. So I think both sides feel it.
So you were that guy. Sorry. You're that guy that they're all mourning when you left. Yeah. Please don't go. Yeah, that's an interesting. I haven't really thought about it, although I should have, because that's when I left Southcrest. I'm sure that's exactly probably what they're thinking is, maybe we can just get another academic year and another year in the college ministry here and make sure it's ready to transition and right. Yeah. Any other ones?
I mean, in 2017, we sent out our missions pastor, and a huge bulk of his job was missions, but he functioned as like my associate pastor, and so what that meant was he preached probably like 7 or 8 times a year, and he helped with pastoral care and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so like him and his wife really felt called to plant order, and they ended up doing that. But that year we were having all these conversations, and I was thinking like the vacuum pain, which is a shorter way of saying that really long, cumbersome sentence that you came up with.
I thought it was catchy.
Just like what kind of a hole, the void is this guy going to leave?
Yep.
And like, I just really had to process through that. Like, is this about me or is this about the kingdom, advancing?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to be the question, and it's really the same question with all these things. Every one of these things comes down to that question of, wait, what's ultimately, because we feel the pain in our organization, and we see the talent leave, and it's hard to be open-handed, feels like rejection. You see these gaps that somebody this talented would have helped with this, could help with this, could help with this. And then you have to take a deep breath and say, bottom line, what am I in this whole thing for? What's the whole point to this? And it really does take you back to that question. Is this for Jesus, for the kingdom expansion, or for me having a really buttoned down organization with a lot of high quality people? I mean, obviously we want both. But oftentimes it's not how it works, Now I will say, as a positive side to this whole thing, every single time that we've sent someone that has created opportunity that would have never been there had that person stayed. So like, I'll give you an example even right now. When Spence left to go to Thailand to, be our field care person for our missionaries, he created an opportunity for Keenan Harris that started off as a resident here, became our youth guy, then family, then a senior ministry director that was overseeing small groups, then worship was added to him. And then when Spence left, we looked around and were like, well, we should just probably promote Keenan. I mean, he's already like supervising nearly half the church. And so, and he is incredible. Like, I probably like working with Keenan as much as any guy I've ever worked with. He's really young. He's like 31. And really good. It wouldn't surprise me if he is my successor, at least in the lead pastor component. Like, he is incredibly good and godly and capable and the best manager on the team. And we wouldn't have got to experience those things. There's like 2 or 3 people that have left over time that every one of those things provided opportunity for Keenan. And I could give you 15 examples like that. And even if we went back and thought through some of those pain stories, you could probably think about that. In fact, let's just even stop. Any of these stories we've shared so far, can you think of someone that God raised up that now then had space to emerge, might not have been there? Y'all have any of those? Your Keenan story? Y'all able to put a happy face on it quite like that yet?
Well, I think for me, it and coming and leading the church, there was a guy fully established in his career who I was able to bring on as a volunteer staff level to help lead in an area where I needed there to be strong leadership. And that opportunity would not have presented itself to sort of explore this volunteer staff position that we hadn't previously had we not had to make some of these other changes.
Wow. That just spurred a thought that, I mean, here's some idolatry in the hearts of pastors everywhere. I'm not saying it was yours, but like, here's what I want, is I want Redeemer Church to basically run on autopilot. That's what I want to happen. I want to be staffed in a way that cool crap just happens. I mean, really, where we're reaching people are growing and being discipled, and when stuff's on fire, they're quickly doused, and they're like, we've got all of our bases covered with really high quality stuff. People are being we're planting churches. I mean, all the stuff, right? And I just want that to kind of happen, and me kind of poke my head in here and be like, all right, okay, you know what I mean? And we're just easy, and I would say, just a thought that was spurred is, man, I have an idol of comfort. Like, I would just want it to be easy. And I know I don't want that guy to go, because I don't want to have to think that hard of another solution. And I just wanted to be on autopilot and for stuff just to happen. But when people leave, like, a redemptive side of it that you just pointed out was that it does cause us to come up with, to develop another leader, and somebody really awesome may be on the cusp and you didn't even know it. There may be other creative solutions in regards to how you staff, how you organize, and that solution was there. Like, you would have never been motivated to have found that solution if you weren't forced to. And if you weren't forced to, you would have chose the status quo. But it's possible. I'd make the case my executive team, as gifted as Spence was, and I miss him, he's a good friend, my executive team right now is the best it's ever been. It's phenomenal, just the synergy of it all with those two guys, with Ben and Keenan. And I would have never made that change in a million years unless I had to, So, I mean, it's kind of like, you forces you out of your comfort zone, and you have to kind of lean back into it. And maybe we ought to just admit that there's never going to be a point when it's going to be easy. That might make things better for us. If we quit ever expecting it to go on autopilot, then the happier we will all be in this line of work, in any line of work, but especially this line of work. All right, well, let me go on to my fifth one. Yeah, sure. Shoot. Yeah.
Justin this morning was saying he's in a season of rest and preparation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how, when you bring these guys, gifted guys, individuals in, how do you avoid temptation also to not overload them?
That was that whole point of they would have really helped here, is that you nailed it, because what you have to do is pretend that, organizationally speaking, they do not exist. And you have to say, no matter what, I don't care what happens, we are not going, like, anything we do, we have to ask, does this help Justin grow and prepare? Not, what does this organization need? That's like, so for instance, he's preached a couple of times, but I'll ask him, hey, would this be helpful? Would you enjoy this? Would this be helpful for you to preach at big church? And he's like, oh, actually, I would love to do that. Okay, well, great. I'd love to give you that visibility, and you'll do a great job. But organizational, like fitting into like leading the college ministry, or maybe help, being Brandon's associate this year. I think the commitment is that they don't exist in our organization. They appear nowhere on the org chart. That's how we do it, because that's what we're trying to do is give them a space for preparation. Yeah. But the temptation is just so great, especially when you're having a lot of turnover and wonky stuff that happens. You're like, oh man, he could be a lifesaver in any one of 5 jobs for us right now. He's so capable. And if you recruit really good people or develop really good people, they are going to be very, very capable when they get to that finishing school residency. And just so to define it, when we're talking residency for church planting, we view it as a finishing school. These are very capable guys with skins on the wall, all of them. And so by the time they're doing that, like, they've been preaching, leading, pastoring, this is just a round out in preparation for church planting at this point. Yeah. Great question, though. That hit the core of that. The fourth pain point, I won't elaborate as much on this one, because it's really, all these are pretty related. I'm going to call this, and it's not brief, Alan, but it's the best I can do. That money would have hired an additional staff member pain. So something else you're going to think about is, you're going to think, with money that you earmark for, maybe paying the resident salary, or for, a church planting residency director, or for direct funding of the church planter, or for the direct funding of the missionary, or for fill in the blank, right? Like there's a certain costliness, financial costliness to being part of church planting and missions. You give to the cooperative program, and you give 5%, you give 10%, you give 15%, whatever it is you give. You start looking at those dollars sometimes, and you're like, okay, we could. Yes, we could. There's a guy that maybe we didn't have anybody here, but there's somebody that we really believe in that wants to go plant a church, and we could jump in on that. But man, it's $25,000. $25,000, and this church plant would hire like 5 full-time staff members, basically. You know what I mean? With the way we pay, and so you know what I mean. It's like we could hire all kinds of people at $25,000, much less 50 or 60 or 70 or whatever it might be. And I think that's this is just all about the money, and that it actually does cost money to plant churches and send missionaries. Period. We were talking about that yesterday. There's a major resource question that is always out there, and this is one that isn't. Church planners are inherently idealistic. Inherently, by nature, we're like, no, we don't need money. We don't need your building, man. Like, all we need is the gospel, and all we need is each other in a living room, and I love that. I love the idealism of church planners. I'm not trying to trigger you, man. I'm really not. And so you're just so idealistic, but then, what's funny is I look at like Hillside here in Lubbock, and they went from not having, and they're a really large church in Amarillo, really good guys. I like them a lot. I mean, they're really, really great. And they're really well led. I mean, I think like one of the stronger leadership cultures around, and I didn't really know much about what they're going to go do. And then I hear they're going to plant in Lubbock. I was like, I don't know. And it was going to be a video venue. And I was like, this ain't going to work here. Well, it helped that they bought about a $7 million property over in Milwaukee and the Spur, and, spent another $5 million, retrofitting it, and sent down 3 like incredibly good and gifted leaders. One of them was a college student in my college ministry at Southcrest. He was like a really, really good leader, incredible, guy named Brad Ingram. And so they had these incredible leaders, incredible location, a lot of money, and I mean, guess what happened? That church like blew up immediately. Like they're bigger than us now, and they've only been going for a handful of years. I'm not saying that to have an effective church plant, you've got to have $12 million and these incredible people, but I'm just saying that almost every church plant is like woefully undercapitalized, and probably underestimates the importance of facility in the long run, and all those things cost money, and and end up just being a little naive at that point. And so we probably ought to be more generous than we are on funding, both the training and development of church planting people, but also the funding of when they get there. And it just, every time you write those checks, you're just like, oh. And just as a pointer on this, to ease some of that pain, like we've had a couple of redemptive points so far, and I think this is going to be another one, is one thing that I've learned that helps is exactly what I do at home. And that's that Amy and I have little buckets. We don't use a cash system because nobody uses cash. That I know that was the kind of the Ramsey way. But we actually have buckets that we have in our sub accounts in our checking account, and we fund those buckets of like, hey, here's our vacation and recreation bucket, and then whenever we write that check, we're going to go to the Caribbean in December. We've been saving up for that. We're going to go in December. Is like we don't feel that. Like we budgeted that money's in that bucket. Whenever we pay for Turks, we're not going to be like, dude, why don't, what about those clothes, or what about our kids' education, or something important, that it's out of our mind. And that's exactly what we do up here. Is our money it goes over into a missions escrow basically, and then it just like we just budget off of this to begin with. Like that money never existed. And so in some ways it takes some of that pain out. But every once in a while I'll look over there and see the dollars that are stacked up on the mission side and how much of them are going out. And I do think that line about that money would have hired a fill in the blank. We could have, and even I could even twist it on a missions one. I could have hired a church planting resident recruiter for, and they'll also help out in the youth ministry, but something like that. So anybody got this story of that money would have hired an additional fill in the blank? Some of your pain dealing with with the costliness of dollars that have gone out the door to support missions and church planting?
I think just on a more general level, what we feel is like every time we send somebody or a group of
Yeah.
people out, there's like the budget impact of like we're going to give this money from the church budget, but then there's the stuff you don't see, which is like 40 families in the church are probably going to slice some of their giving to the church to give to those new efforts.
Yep.
And so it's like, it doesn't all come off the bottom line in the same way. Like some of it's there and some of it's hidden, but it all affects your church. So we've really felt that, you know, so like if there's, you know, we've got 11 units that we've sent out or whatever, and
Yep.
the budget says, you know, 100 and whatever $1,000, but then there's another 50 grand that's not on the books. It's not coming to us anymore because it's going to
Yeah.
them.
As much as we like to pretend it doesn't, you know, that that happens some.
So
Yeah.
Or the ones that you send are usually good givers.
that's exactly right.
Oh, dang.
That's
Oh,
what
dang.
we felt in
Now
that.
zero.
That's where you combine like,
Why is the Lord calling you to go?
that's where that combines like,
Right there, hold up.
that combines 1, 2, 3, and 4 all together in that one, that scenario. Or talent drain, open-handedness pain that would have really helped here pain, and their money is not. Yeah, that just touches all the bases. Good job.
That's
Yeah.
one that we feel
Yeah,
in that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
For some reason,
it's all
like that. You go,
it's
wait,
all real. And again, I think that there's just, I hope there's a theme you're starting to see here that pastors are people, and some of these things are just a little bit exposing here is, wait, but my organization I lead, that by the way is how people judge me is on the success of my organization on how it's doing, that money is going to weaken it. And I mean, let's just call it what it is, you know? And I feel every last one of these points of insecurity and pain and loss, and a lot of them are because we want the thing that our name is associated with. Like this is for a lot of us, our life work. And when they say Dusty, most people in Lubbock would say one of 3 things: Amy's husband, from knowing her in the medical world; 2, Dusty, the youth sports coach; 3, Dusty, pastor guy. It's one of those 3 things. And probably, I would say a lot of them are going to know me on that 3rd bucket. And I don't want that 3rd bucket to suck. You know, I want it to be really awesome, incredible. To think, oh man, Dusty, you know. And but really, that isn't the point, is it? And it's not why we got in this, and it's not actually how we find our identity. It's in Christ. We're clean. We're loved because of Jesus. And it becomes a really sad thing when we're using this church that we lead to make us feel better about us. And that's a recurring theme, right? Okay, 5th pain point of sending. Do they think they know more? Do they think they know better than me? Pain. And let me tell you what this one is. So, on the do they think they know better than me? Pain. It helped me understand how David felt over at South Crest with us a little bit when we planted Redeemer Round Rock, because we've had a little bit, I mean, just bluntly, a little bit of a strained relationship with our sending church. I mean, they are really Baptist, like capital B Baptist. We're like 6-point font B Baptist, all right? Like somewhat Baptist, you know. I mean, we baptize believing people, and we're part of the SBC, but, you know, we see some things differently. Theologically, our methods are really different. And I understood where David was coming from more when we planted our first church in Round Rock. Josh and Jordan went all in and drank all the juice on like the Soma model of church planting, which I don't even know if y'all know what that is. It's not nearly as hot now, mostly because it just kind of has lost a lot of steam. But at the time, man, I had a lot of steam, and it was really like, it was a very organic model of like, yeah, you do church on Sunday, but really, like, you're really all about like the essentially small groups, and that really is the church. Even in ecclesiology, you would say that really is the church. And then we're going to have another expression of that when all of our little house churches get together for corporate gatherings, and maybe once a month we won't even bother doing that. Like, you can go out in the park and do other things. And I'm actually not speaking negatively of it. I'm just saying it's a different philosophy. And I remember when I started seeing them go in that direction whenever they moved to Austin, and then began to develop, like, it's kind of like kids move out of the house and they're not trying to reproduce Redeemer Lubbock. They're wrestling with the Lord on what God's calling them to do in Round Rock, Texas. And it was notably different than what we did. And I remember some of my own insecurities were, again, here's this thing that keeps coming up. I'm going, well, what's so wrong with the way we're doing it? Why can't you just take this? Here's the playbook, man. Go run the freaking playbook in Round Rock. Like, what's the deal? But they were really wrestling. Well, now what's funny is over time, they've come back kind of, in a lot of ways, methodologically, with what Jordan and Josh are doing in Round Rock is actually very, very similar now. And some of the things they learned about leadership development in Soma really have strengthened them and me now, that in a really cool way. But it actually made me be a bit more understanding and gracious with David, is that's exactly how he felt, I'm sure, is we planted this church down the road, and I'm sure he thought, well, why aren't y'all just doing, here's the playbook, man. Run the dang playbook. Like, this has worked. We got 2,500 people over here. Why do you feel like you need to go, do you think we're doing it wrong? And actually, that isn't at all how I felt. And that's not how Jordan and Josh felt about us. I'm not saying they were doing anything wrong. This is the call that God had on us. We're being missionaries here, thinking creatively and freshly and taken from the Bible on how we could reach our community. But again, there's a pain of a sense of rejection. You're going to plant some people that are going to do things a little different than you. I mean, there's just no, in fact, I would really question what we're doing if they didn't. I mean, it would be a really strange thing if you're planting young church planters, they're going to think the same way methodologically and missiologically as their 50-year-old lead pastor, right? And again, it's going to highlight insecurities. Sixth and final one. So we've had talent drain, open-handedness. They would have really helped here. That money would have hired an additional staff member. Do they think they know better than me? All those different pains. And my last one that I've probably felt the most consistently is, does anyone actually want to give their life for Lubbock with Redeemer pain? Because how it feels like over the years is that almost everybody on our church staff, go ask them. Go ask some of the ones with wooden name tags. Hey, you see yourself in Lubbock for the rest of your life? You just going to be on church staff at Redeemer? And lots of people do that. Seems like Austin Stone, those same guys have been there forever, like the ones I know. I mean, there's a few guys that move around, but the Clear Creek guys, I was talking to somebody about them in Houston. I mean, they've been there like forever, the Village, they've had those same 6 or 7 top guys in Dallas for as long as I've known. The Southcrest staff has been pretty static over there. And yet it feels like everybody from the very beginning is like, oh, I'm excited about this job. I mean, I'm not going to be here forever. But, in addition to having, just in general, maybe that might be a Lubbock thing and the age of people that we reach. But some of it's the sending culture this is where you can't have it both ways. If what you're doing all the time is you're beating a drum and you're saying, hey, our life is to be spent for Jesus. Be willing to go to the Arabian Peninsula. Be willing to go to Wichita Falls. Be willing to go, and you're saying this all the time, and you've had very prominent leaders that have left and done that very thing, be missionaries, be all these different things, then it shouldn't surprise you that your junior staff members and your church members are thinking, how can we spend our life the most strategically? And you know what we ought to do? And they're thinking the same exact thing. And then you end up feeling like, does anybody want to just do this here? And here's where I've landed on this. Here's where I think I can sustain. I'm actually okay with, on our staff and among our membership, if we're almost constantly churning our junior and even middle management of this church, that constantly churning it, developing, sending. I don't want to have a back door. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about intentional sending, people strategically spending their lives to maximize their impact. I can actually live with it. Really what I need just a couple or 3 that want to spend the rest of their life doing this with me. That's really what I need. And some people to lock arms, because I've gotten really cynical on the 6th pain point. I remember when Josh and Jordan and Drew left, I was kind of pissed about it. I really was. I was not happy. I wasn't mad at them, but I was more like even a little sore at the Lord. I'm going, okay, well, here I am by myself. This is great. And just felt really alone in it. And I think that there's something really significant about even saying out loud what you need and what you want, and to have a couple of people to lock arms in addition to your spouse, which is awesome, but some people to carry that work with you over the long haul. And I need that. I think it's something I've really discovered, that at the senior level, having that constant churn is not healthy for me. I need some people to lock arms and see it all the way through. And I think we actually have that in place now too. So those are a few pain points that I've experienced. And if I was gonna sum some of these things up, then I'm gonna have you interact a little bit on your phone or on your journal for a second, is that, man, there's so much joy in sending. There really is, and that's highlighted in a lot of ways on this conference, and it's really compelling. The main reason it's compelling is because Jesus is worth it, and life is really short, and the kingdom of God is a joy to walk in, and grace is beautiful, and we want as many people as we can to walk in the grace of Jesus. And so, like, that's the reason we want to pour our life out. That's the reason we send church planners. That's why we give our money. That's why we send missionaries. That's why we do all that, is because Jesus is worth it. That's the one reason to do it. And I wanted to highlight that that it's painful, though, and to be idealistic about it and not lean into that pain. It's painful for church planters to go. It's painful for missionaries. It's painful in a surprising way for the sending church, in a very surprising way. And we've talked about 6 of those different ways. And the other thing to highlight here is just interesting, those pain points, how many of those intersect us at points of insecurity. And it's another reason for pastoral leaders and spouses and other ministry leaders to anchor our souls deeply into God's Word and walk deeply with Him. And so our identity is rooted there, and we're not trying to use our churches to make us feel good about us. And that is a major, probably the biggest barrier. And if you think about it, like when you've seen these situations go badly, and where somebody says, "Hey, I'd like to plant a church, Pastor. Can I do it?" And they're like, "Mm-mm." And we all know stories like that. No, you're not planting a church here. That'd divide my church. And no, and like that's what's driving it, right? No, you can't go. No, then you need to get off stage. Give me the keys. Okay, if you want to talk to that church about that job, then I see where your heart is. But it's these insecurities that it's not just them out there, but it can be us too. Even being vindictive, being pouty. Sure, you could, if that's what you want. Sure, then you can fill out the application. That's fine, And I mean, you're seeming like you're being open-handed, but you're not. And but man, there's such grace and joy, and there is more joy in this way. I think at the end of the day, even with all the pain, to say, Lord, it's all yours. I own none of it, and none of the people are mine. None of the money is mine. All to be deployed for you. And if our organization takes a little step back, we don't want to be unwise like the mom that pops out kids, every single year. We might need a spa day, and so be wise. But at the same time, like we want to be spent. And if our church is a little smaller, then that's okay. It really is. We could have had a couple more staff people, but we multiplied this in other churches, and that's a cost that we were willing to do. So I've got a few questions I want you to interact with in your journal for a second. Or if you got an iPhone, then you can just jot down a few thoughts on that. Or if nothing else, think about it. So here's a question for you that I couldn't answer this for you, but I want you to wrestle with. On the money thing, how does your current church budget reflect the priority of sending? When you look at it, money talks. How does your current church budget reflect the priority of sending? Specifically, church planning, missions, global mission sending. I'm going to put those in one bucket. I'll give you a second to write that down there. I would say anything less than 10%, and I would say you're probably not very serious about it. You may say you are, your church may say you are, but you're probably not. I'm not trying to make fun of you about it. I'm just saying that probably it shows you something. This is a real similar question that you would ask some of your church members to go, hey, go back and look over look at your giving statement. Does it reflect generosity with what you give? I'm not saying this in a legalistic way, but money talks. It speaks of priority and worth and value. I think it'd even be fun to ask this related question, does it hurt right now? Does the amount of money you give to church planning and missions, does it sting a little bit? And if it doesn't, might that be a fun goal with you and your church leaders to say, man, let's see if we can get that out to 20% over the next decade. Let's see, again, you don't want to deplete it where you're not healthy, but even to set some goals and where it leaves a little bit of a mark. Just interact with it. I'll give you a second more just to write or any other thoughts you've got about that. Okay, so here's a question I want you to interact with. Is you can just write, if you're writing it down, just write territorialism / insecurity ? Is, as we've been talking about this, when you think of leaders that have left, churches you've planted, staff members that have departed, church members that have gotten transferred out, have you sensed any territorialism and insecurity in your heart about that whenever they have moved on? And do you feel like God's asking you to make any, to take any action right now in terms of a heart posture in relation to that? I want you to spend a little time reflecting on that. Have you noticed any insecurity or territorialism? And is God calling you to take any action on that right now in terms of a heart posture? And this is probably a lot bigger conversation that you may just want to talk with and be like, yeah, when John left a few years ago, man, it really hurt me, and here's why it hurt me. I mean, there's a lot to this, but I just want you to initially interact. It may be that another church planter was talking about coming into your city, and he wasn't one of yours. It'd been fine if it was one of yours, but it's some other tribe, and you haven't been real happy about it. It might just be you need to think differently about that church planter. I don't know what that is, but there's a lot of different things that could be. Maybe you just need to think differently about that staff member that left last year. Okay, the last one is, what is a single step you can take right now to embrace the pain of sending, as well as the joy? What's a single step you can take? Again, some of these things you may not have an answer. It may be, actually, we need to increase our budget. We need to develop a sending culture. We need to quit trying to hold on to all of our people and yelling at them for even looking at other things. I don't know what that is for you. But what's a single step? What's one thing you can do for your whole church to be, or that whole ministry that you're a part of, to have more of that heartbeat kind of dripping through all the way? Okay, I'm going to take, we've got like maybe 5 minutes left. Is that right, Mitch? Before we're about done here? Yeah, so anybody want to share anything, any reflections from what you wrote or any thoughts from today?
If I could twist it a little bit, Dusty.
Yeah, have at it.
But you started off by saying that when you started, you aspired to have elders, but you didn't have them.
Yeah.
I assume you have elders now.
Yeah, we did. So I had to start the work again. I didn't finish that story, but after those two guys left, and then my most capable third guy, fortunately a former missionary, came back and was pretty much ready to go. And then we had another one that I sent to Alan that we had been a college student of mine, went to MIT, crazy smart, came back. And probably about year 5 was whenever we got back to having 3 again. And then now we've got 9 and we'll have 12 in a year. But it took us to year 5 before we got back up to having 3 elders again. Yeah. So it just takes a long time. And I know some guys that say in church plants, you probably shouldn't install elders until year 5 or even year 7, just because I could give you story after story of capsized churches because of immature elders installed.
And I think I agree with that statement. But I guess my reaction to all this pain conversation is that it seems to me that there's the loss of staff pain, that if your elders are walking with you, they're not all, that they're lay elders, if they're walking with you. I guess I'm asking the question, if we were to put ourselves into discipling these laymen who are not maybe going to be leaving, they're entrenched in your church, they help to soften some of this pain.
Yeah, you know what's funny that you mentioned this is you notice how almost all of my stories, I don't know if I've ever put my finger on it until you just said this, you notice almost all my stories were in the first 5 years, almost all those, when Josh and Drew left and when this and this and this. And I think that's a really significant component of it, is that all of my elders don't have an exit strategy. Or let me say it better, none of my elders currently have an exit strategy. Like, they are all Lubbock guys that plan on being here, whether they're on staff or not. And they really are in it for the duration. Really good point. That's a good way to mitigate it, is you've got these guys that have roots. Yeah, really good.
I just want to say thank you for sharing pain points. Like, sometimes we who don't have a sending culture see, Redeemer, like, oh, they're a sending machine and they got this down, or Nathan Leno, oh man, they're doing this in their sleep, and we feel like we can't do that. So knowing if even the big boys hurt is encouraging for us to push.
Glad I could encourage you with our pain, man. I'm good at that. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
So in light of like that last point, we didn't talk much on it, but maybe you just answered it with the whole year 5 thing, and maybe it's an insecurity of a year 3 planter. At what point, and maybe it's still an insecurity for you, but at what point do you start going, okay, there's other people as invested in this as I am, right? Like we find our identity in it, like you mentioned, and at some point you go, okay, is that, like I found myself consistently looking at some different staff or different individuals, and we've sent plenty out.
Yep.
We go, are you in this for the long haul? Like, how much more can I invest in you emotionally if you were to leave, right? Like, how much would that drain me?
That's exactly how I felt. Is after all those guys left at year 3, I almost felt like I was a jilted lover with my arms crossed going, I'll never love again. I mean, that's really what I felt like, is I put all these things into y'all, and y'all been my brothers, and then, you know, I mean, that's how it felt. It really did. I mean, it was just like, it stung in a beautiful way, but like I really reeled from it, you know. Well, maybe I'm not going to have it. Maybe.
Points to like trust again, so to speak, in that sense. I don't have anybody that close that has left, but
Yeah, I mean, some of it is having a good balance of people that are going to be in it for the duration, whether it be your non-staffed elders or other staff people, other church members that are in there for the duration. I mean, I think that's some of it for sure. But I mean, I think some of it too is an organizational life cycle. There's a guy named Gene Adizes that wrote a book called Organizational Life Cycles. He's actually a Christian guy. It's super interesting. But what he says is that, and all this stuff applies for business startups and church startups. It's the same kind of guy that does it. Is that he makes a case that a business startup or church plant, that it's like a jet, has to make so much noise and thrust to get off. It's really incredible that jets fly, really, you know, and it requires so much screeching and, you know, carrying on for it to get up. And that's church planter. Like, nobody believes in it as much as you know, like you are in it and you're making all this noise and it requires all this thrust to get it going. And so he just makes this case that it's actually what makes organizations go. So don't be surprised for the first several years if nobody bleeds it like you do. Like, that's actually what's going to happen. I mean, that's the whole point, is that you're kind of, people are drafting off of you as this thing's getting off the ground. And then what I have observed is over time is as leaders are developed and there's people that buy in, people that are converted through your ministry that go all the way through it and begin to rise up through it, like believe in it to their toenails, every bit as much as you. It just takes time. And you shouldn't be surprised at year 3 when you're the one screeching still, you know, and making all this noise and, you know, and nobody else really is yet. He does go on to say that he calls it the founder's trap, that starts working against you at the life stage that we have been in for a bit. That if you can't figure out how to kind of reinvent yourself, that kind of basic leadership tactic starts to work against the leader and the organization. So at that point, you need these other people that are owning it with you, that are better at things and allow you to be kind of good at that one thing. And
some of that.
yeah, and that's a whole other conversation. Yeah, but it's a different kind of pain, right?
I've started to see some of that, and just
Yeah.
trying to think through that in my own heart. So we just planted, or the network just planted another San Angelo church,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're talking about, did they do it better? We sent a whole MC with them, you know,
Yeah,
so there's a
which is
lot of-
incredible. Walk us through that. How did that feel to send a whole small group over to another church?
Potential leaders, we just trained them up for, 2 of our potential MC leaders were in that, and you know, so
Yeah.
this year as a whole has been almost one that's, from our trajectory, we're going great, and then 2021's kind of just been flat, right? Because we've sent so many good gospel goodbyes, but we've continued to gain as well. So the curve never went down, it just kind of flattened off. But
You experienced all that talent drain, open-handedness. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
but in the midst of that, there were some people that I'm going. So Ryan Owens, who's the guy that planted, his wife has been really good friends with one of ours that's been there from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I expected them to go, and it was shocking to me to see how much, like you're talking about, vested ownership they had
Yep.
in the vessel. Even though their best friends are helping plant a church over here, they're going, no, this is our church home. We've seen this thing grow from infancy to where it is today, you know. And so it was really neat to be able to go, okay, no, if I can start to trust other people in the church who do want to stay in San Angelo or give their
Yep.
lives away for this. It's interesting working through that.
Yeah. I just want to say out loud, man, your faith in that and kingdom-mindedness is just beautiful. I think beautiful to Jesus, truly.
Hey, that's the organizational life cycles.
Yeah, I could. If you remind me, I've got Adizes. I'll show you when we get back there. I've got it on my Kindle. mean, it's dense, but it's super, and he actually walks through like several life stages and talks about a trap and a problem at each life cycle that can keep you, from moving to the next and even from going backwards. I actually think it would be incredible church planner training because it's designed as an entrepreneurial book and life cycle, like here's how organizations go through, but you'll be able to see your organization, any organization, a business could see going, oh, here's what's happening to us right now and why. And a big hint is that we're a big part of the problem a lot of times. Yeah. And a big part of the reason for success too. Maybe. Yeah, I think that's it by Gina Deasy's. But maybe I can find the spelling and all that here in a second. You see if you pull it up there, Alan. Is it coming? Good.
Like there's a bunch of books by that name, but
Yeah.
nobody by the name of Adidas.
Not Adidas. I'll find it in a second. Yeah. The spelling I can't remember. Yeah. Okay, well, I think we've gone a little overtime. Grateful for you guys. And y'all wrestle some of those questions because I think one of the best things you can do, like I saw Bob Burns wrote a book called Resilient Ministry. This isn't a church planning thing. This is about still pastoring in 30 years thing. And millions of dollars of research on what makes people stay in the ministry. And like 5 things. And it's stuff, it's nothing, it's about the stuff you would expect, like spiritual, like healthy spiritual disciplines and, marriage and family and self-care. But one of the things was like emotional intelligence and relational IQ and things like this too. And it just made me think a lot of these things here of really understanding yourself and like mourning losses and just acknowledging that things hurt and even just being spiritually mature and having the gospel form you, that like that character formation ends up being the way that you don't end up bitter and you could stay healthy, and being aware that, oh, I'm not just making a bunch of excuses about this, but like this is why I'm reacting with this person wanting to leave, and that is actually not healthy. This is not about them. This is actually saying more about me. And having a sense of those things and be able to correct and apply the gospel to your heart in an ongoing way is how you'll keep doing it, and maybe by God's grace, send a few people while we do it. So, okay, well, sending pain. That wasn't exactly your title of this, but that's where I went with it, is what's hard about sending. So, yeah, maybe they'll still want to at the end of this. I don't know. Questionable. All right, thanks, guys. We'll see you at the panel here in a second.